Thanks for tuning in to Cheating Confessions. Don't miss the jaw-dropping conclusion. Madison had always been the kind of woman who turned heads. But tonight in New Orleans, she was about to turn the tables on everything she thought she knew about herself, and perhaps everything she thought she knew about her marriage. Madison was 42 years old, an elegant and confident woman who had a magnetic presence that drew attention wherever she went. Her husband, Ethan, who was 44, had always been proud of her charm and beauty. But tonight, he seemed to have something else in mind. The evening began innocently enough as she and Ethan arrived at a lavish party hosted by one of his old college friends. The atmosphere was electric, the kind of energy you only find in a city like New Orleans. The air was thick with laughter, the scent of aged whiskey mingling with the rich aroma of cigars, creating a heady blend that seemed to make everyone a little bolder, a little more daring. Ethan introduced Madison to his friends with a hint of possessiveness in his tone, the way he always did, but there was an edge to it tonight. His friends' eyes lingered on her a bit too long, their gazes holding an intensity that felt almost predatory. Madison could sense it, a vibe that made her feel both exhilarated and uncomfortable. It wasn't the first time men had looked at her this way. She knew the effect she had, but tonight felt different, charged with something darker, something that set her on edge. As they settled into the rhythm of the party, Ethan leaned in close to her, his voice low and teasing. "You could charm anyone in this room," he whispered, the words laced with a challenge. It wasn't just a compliment, it was a dare, a test, and she could feel his eyes searching hers, waiting to see how she'd respond. The atmosphere shifted, a tension creeping into the air as his friends exchanged knowing glances. It was as if they'd been waiting for this moment, and suddenly Madison felt as though she was on stage, an unwitting player in a script she hadn't written. The drinks flowed, and as the night wore on, the party took on a different tone. What started as casual banter soon escalated into a series of games, each one designed to peel away the layers of inhibition. Madison found herself at the center of attention, the men's eyes tracking her every movement, their voices growing louder and more daring with each drink they downed. Ethan watched her with a look she couldn't quite read, and it unsettled her. The first dare seemed harmless enough. "Kiss another man," one of Ethan's friends suggested, his voice dripping with an excitement that made Madison's heart race. She hesitated, her pulse quickening as she glanced around the room, feeling the walls closing in. But then, there was Ethan, watching her intently, a slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth, and that was all it took. She leaned in, feeling the warmth of the other man's breath on her skin as their lips met. It was a kiss that held more weight than she could have imagined, a dangerous beginning that sent a thrill through her entire body. The kiss changed everything. The atmosphere in the room grew heavier, thick with unspoken desires, as Madison felt her inhibitions slipping away with every sip of her drink and every stolen glance from Ethan. It was as if the air itself had taken on a life of its own, wrapping around her, pulling her deeper into the moment. The dares began to escalate, each one pushing Madison further into uncharted territory. She felt her pulse quicken with every challenge, her mind racing as she tried to make sense of what was happening. Ethan's eyes never left her, their intensity growing darker, as if he were silently urging her to go further, to let go completely. "Sit on his lap," another man said, his voice carrying an undercurrent of excitement. Madison hesitated, a flicker of uncertainty crossing her face. She glanced at Ethan, hoping to see a sign of restraint, but there was none. Instead, his expression remained unreadable, his gaze unwavering. "So," she complied, lowering herself onto the lap of the man who had issued the dare. His hands settled on her hips, holding her in place, and Madison felt a shiver run down her spine, a mix of fear and excitement that left her breathless. As she sat there, surrounded by Ethan's friends, their comments grew more suggestive, more blatant in their intentions. It was as if they were testing her, pushing to see how far she would go, how much she was willing to give. And to her surprise, a part of her enjoyed it. The thrill of being watched, the power that came from being the center of their attention. The room buzzed with electricity, the air thick with the scent of whiskey, sweat, and something else, something raw and primal. The dares became more explicit, each one designed to strip away another layer of her defenses, to push her deeper into the role they were all too eager to cast her in. Madison felt herself slipping into it, her actions growing bolder, more daring, as she let go of the person she thought she was. The next dare was more intimate, more demanding. "Kiss him again," one of the men said, nodding toward the man whose lap she was sitting on. But this time, it wasn't just a kiss. It was a statement, a declaration of how far she was willing to go, of what she was willing to do in front of her husband and his friends. She leaned in, her heart pounding in her ears as their lips met once more, this time with a hunger that sent shivers down her spine. She felt Ethan's eyes on her, felt the heat of his gaze as he watched her cross a line she never thought she would. The room seemed to hold its breath, and Madison could sense the shift, the way the men's eyes darkened with something that bordered on obsession. They were no longer just onlookers, they were participants, and she could feel their desire, their need to see just how far they could push her. Each time she complied, each time she took a step further into the darkness, she felt a surge of power, a sense of control that was intoxicating. Madison could barely recognize herself now. The thrill of it all, the excitement, the danger, the way Ethan's eyes never left her, it was more than she had ever experienced. And she realized, with a jolt of fear and exhilaration, that she didn't want it to end. She craved the attention, the way it made her feel alive in a way she hadn't felt in years. Ethan's friends, emboldened by her compliance, began to take liberties, their touches growing bolder, more insistent. And Madison, to her own disbelief, allowed it. She could feel Ethan's gaze burning into her as she let herself be drawn deeper into their game, her actions becoming more intimate, more daring with each passing moment. It was as if she had unlocked something inside herself, something that had been waiting to be set free. The tension in the room was palpable, almost suffocating, as Madison continued to push the boundaries of what she thought she could handle. Each dare was a step deeper into an abyss she had never imagined herself entering. Her body moved almost on its own, responding to their commands, each touch, each whispered word, fueling a fire that burned hotter than anything she had ever felt. Then came the next challenge, one that made her heart skip a beat. "Unbutton your dress," one of the men said, his voice smooth but firm, leaving no room for hesitation. Madison's fingers trembled as they moved to the buttons, the room falling silent as she slowly began to expose herself. The air felt colder against her skin, her heartbeat pounding in her ears as she undid each button. She could feel their eyes on her, could feel the heat of their stares as if they were physically touching her. Ethan stood off to the side, his expression still unreadable, but his eyes were darker than she had ever seen them, burning with an intensity that both frightened and excited her. He wasn't stopping this. He wasn't saying a word. Madison felt her breath hitch as she reached the last button, her dress slipping from her shoulders to pool around her feet. She stood there, exposed, vulnerable, and yet there was a thrill in it, a sense of power that made her head swim. "You're beautiful," one of Ethan's friends murmured, stepping closer, his eyes raking over her body with blatant appreciation. Madison's pulse quickened, a flush creeping up her neck as she met his gaze. She had never felt so desired, so wanted, and it was intoxicating. The next dare followed quickly. Kiss him again, but this time, make it last. Madison swallowed hard, glancing at Ethan one last time, but all she saw was his silent approval, his eyes urging her forward. She turned back to the man in front of her, their breaths mingling as she leaned in, her lips brushing against his. This time the kiss was different. It was slow, deliberate, and filled with a hunger that made her knees weak. She felt his hands slide up her arms, pulling her closer, and she melted into him, losing herself in the moment. The others watched, their eyes dark with desire, their expressions a mix of awe and something more primal. They had all been waiting for this, for the moment when Madison would finally let go, and she could feel their excitement, their need to see how far she would go. And the more they watched, the more she wanted to show them, to prove to herself that she could be this bold, this daring. But the night was far from over. As the kiss ended, Madison found herself being pulled into the center of the room, the dares coming faster now, each one pushing her further into uncharted territory. They asked her to sit on the laps of different men, to let them run their hands along her body, and with each touch, each whisper, she felt herself slipping deeper into a world she had never thought she would enter. It was thrilling, terrifying, and addictive all at once. Ethan's friends grew more daring, their hands exploring her body with a confidence that made her heart race. And each time she complied, each time she allowed herself to be touched, she would glance at Ethan, waiting for him to stop it, to say something. But he remained silent, his eyes locked on her, a small smile playing on his lips, as if he were enjoying every second of her descent. Madison felt herself being swept away, caught up in a whirlwind of emotions that left her breathless. There was a part of her that wanted to pull back, to stop this before it went too far, but another part, the part that had been buried deep inside her, wanted to see how far she could go. And with each passing moment that part grew stronger, drowning out the voice of reason, the voice that told her she should be ashamed, that this wasn't who she was. But maybe, just maybe, it was. The night took on a surreal quality as Madison found herself in a situation she could never have imagined, surrounded by men who were eager to see her push her limits. Each new dare seemed to strip away another piece of who she thought she was, replacing it with someone else, someone who was willing to surrender to the thrill, to the danger, to the unknown. The men's eyes were filled with expectation, their voices growing more insistent as they dared her to take things further. "Let him touch you," one of them whispered, his voice barely audible over the pounding in her ears. Madison hesitated for a moment, her heart racing as she looked over at Ethan. He remained still, watching her intently, and in his eyes she saw something she hadn't seen before: pride. It was as if he was proud of how far she was willing to go, of how much she was willing to give up in front of him and his friends. Taking a deep breath, Madison nodded, allowing herself to be guided back into the arms of one of Ethan's friends. His hands were gentle at first, tentative, as they brushed against her bare skin, sending a shiver down her spine. But as she leaned into his touch, as she allowed herself to be vulnerable, his movements became bolder, more confident. Madison's breath caught in her throat, her body responding in ways that surprised even her. The other men watched with rapt attention, their expressions shifting from curiosity to something more intense. They began to move closer, forming a circle around her, each of them eager to take their turn. It was as if they had all been waiting for this moment, and Madison could feel their excitement, their anticipation, building to a fever pitch. Ethan's presence loomed in the background, a silent observer to his wife's descent into this new reality. And with each touch, each whispered word, Madison felt herself slipping further away from the woman she used to be, becoming someone entirely new. She glanced at Ethan again, searching for any sign that he would intervene, that he would stop this. But instead he simply nodded, a small smile tugging at the corners of his mouth as if to encourage her to keep going. The dares grew more explicit, more demanding, and Madison felt herself teetering on the edge, torn between the desire to stop and the overwhelming urge to continue. She was dared to dance for them, to move her body in ways that left little to the imagination, and as she did, she could feel the heat of their stares, could hear the sharp intake of breath as she swayed her hips, as she ran her hands along her body. It was a performance unlike any she had ever given, and the power she felt in that moment was intoxicating. "Touch him," one of the men urged, his voice hoarse with desire, and Madison found herself obeying, her fingers trailing down the chest of the man in front of her. She felt his muscles tense beneath her touch, heard the sharp intake of his breath, and it sent a thrill through her. She wasn't just participating in this game, she was in control, and the realization of that power sent a shiver down her spine. The night continued to spiral, and Madison felt herself being passed from one man to the next, their hands roaming over her body, their voices growing more urgent, more demanding. With each touch, each kiss, she felt herself letting go a little more, surrendering to the moment, to the thrill, to the desire that pulsed through her veins. And through it all, Ethan stood back, his gaze never wavering, his eyes never leaving her. There was something almost possessive about the way he watched, something that made her heart skip a beat. It was as if he was reveling in her transformation, taking pride in the fact that his wife was willing to cross lines she had never even imagined existed. Madison felt the weight of their eyes on her, felt the heat of their bodies pressing in close, and it was almost too much. But instead of pulling back, instead of stopping, she pushed forward, moving into the arms of yet another man, allowing him to guide her movements, to control her, to take her deeper into this world she had only just begun to explore. The night stretched on, the hours blending together into a blur of movement and sensation, and Madison felt herself drifting, her mind growing hazy with each passing moment. She was no longer the woman who had walked into this party with her husband. She was something else entirely, something stronger, something more daring, something that made her feel alive in a way she hadn't felt in years. And as she glanced at Ethan, saw the way his eyes glistened with approval, with pride, she knew that there was no going back. She had crossed a line, and there was no longer any pretending that she was the same woman she had been before. This was her reality now, and for better or worse, she had chosen to embrace it. As the night deepened, the atmosphere shifted once again. The men's voices grew more animated, their laughter blending with the seductive rhythm of the music that pulsed in the background. The playful banter escalated, becoming more daring, more charged with a sense of urgency. It was as if the room itself was alive, throbbing with a need that matched the tension between them all. "Let's take this to the next level," one of Ethan's friends suggested, his eyes gleaming with mischief. Madison felt a mixture of excitement and dread. What more could they possibly ask of her? But her curiosity outweighed her fear, and she nodded, eager to see where this wild ride would lead. "Strip for us," another man chimed in, his tone both teasing and commanding. The words hung in the air, electrifying the already tense atmosphere. Madison's heart raced. She had pushed so many boundaries tonight, and now they were asking her to cross another. Yet, the thrill of it all, the exhilaration of being the center of their attention, was too enticing to resist. With a deep breath, she began to move, her fingers deftly trailing down her sides as she let the fabric of her dress slide down her body. The room fell silent, all eyes fixed on her as she revealed more of herself, one tantalizing inch at a time. She felt exposed and vulnerable, yet there was an undeniable power in her actions. She was taking control of the moment, and it sent a jolt of electricity through her veins. As the last piece of clothing fell away, Madison stood before them, fully exposed, a wave of heat washing over her as the realization of her nudity hit. They were mesmerized, their gazes roaming over her body with an intensity that left her breathless. She felt alive in a way she never had before, vulnerable yet powerful, stripped bare yet filled with an exhilarating sense of freedom. Ethan stepped closer, the corners of his mouth curling into a satisfied smile. The approval in his eyes fueled her desire to push even further, to explore this new side of herself. "You're incredible," he murmured, his voice low and thick with emotion. Madison felt a rush of warmth at his words, a sense of validation that made her heart swell. "Now, let's see how far you're willing to go," another friend urged, stepping forward with an air of confidence that made Madison's stomach flip. The challenges became more explicit and she found herself willingly participating, lost in the thrill of the moment. Each new dare felt like a test of her limits, a way to explore the depths of her desires. "Dance for us," one of them suggested, and Madison moved to the center of the room, her body swaying to the rhythm of the music. She let herself get lost in the movement, her hips rolling as she embraced the primal energy in the air. The men watched with hungry eyes, their expressions a mix of awe and desire, and she felt the heat rise in her cheeks, a thrill coursing through her. With each dance move, she shed more of her inhibitions, surrendering to the music and the attention that surrounded her. Their cheers and applause fueled her, driving her to be bolder, to explore the sensations that washed over her. Madison was no longer just performing, she was becoming the embodiment of everything she had ever wanted to be: confident, alluring, and free. As she twirled and spun, her laughter mingling with the music, she caught glimpses of Ethan's face, his gaze unwavering, filled with a mix of admiration and something else. Something darker, something that sent shivers down her spine. She could feel the electricity between them, a palpable connection that ignited the air around her. And, just when she thought the night couldn't get any more intense, one of the men stepped forward with a new dare, one that made her heart race. "Let's take this to the bedroom," he suggested, his voice laced with excitement. The idea sent a thrill through her, a mix of fear and exhilaration that left her breathless. Madison glanced back at Ethan, searching for reassurance, for a sign that this was okay. But he simply nodded, a glimmer of approval in his eyes. "Go on," he urged, his voice thick with desire. That simple gesture ignited something deep within her, and she felt a surge of confidence as she accepted the challenge. With a deep breath, she stepped forward, ready to embrace whatever came next, ready to explore the depths of her desires. This was the moment she had been waiting for, and she was determined to seize it with both hands. As Madison walked toward the bedroom, her heart raced with anticipation and a hint of trepidation. The atmosphere in the room shifted dramatically, the energy crackling with an excitement that felt almost tangible. She could hear the low murmur of voices behind her, the laughter and cheers of Ethan's friends blending into a chorus of encouragement. Each step felt like a leap into the unknown, a journey into a world where boundaries no longer existed. The bedroom was dimly lit, the soft glow of lamps casting shadows on the walls, creating an intimate atmosphere that heightened her senses. The air was thick with anticipation, and as she stepped inside, she turned to find the men following her, their eyes glinting with desire and hunger. The thrill of being the center of attention flooded her, and for the first time that night, she felt a surge of true power. "Are you ready?" one of the men asked, his voice smooth and enticing, and she could see the excitement dancing in his eyes. Madison nodded, her breath hitching as she took in the scene before her. The room was charged with a sense of urgency, and she could feel the weight of their gazes on her, igniting a fire deep within her. They closed in around her, forming a semicircle, and she stood at the center, fully aware of her vulnerability, yet reveling in the attention. Their whispers echoed in her ears, urging her on, fueling her desire to explore this newfound freedom. Madison took a deep breath, letting it out slowly as she embraced the moment, feeling more alive than ever. "Let's see just how far you're willing to go," another friend said, stepping forward with a playful grin. Madison's heart raced at the challenge, and without hesitation she leaned into the experience, allowing herself to be swept away by the excitement that filled the room. One by one, they began to interact with her, their hands exploring, teasing, and igniting sensations she had never experienced before. Madison felt herself losing track of time, the boundaries between reality and fantasy blurring as the night unfolded around her. The men's laughter, their touches, the heat of their bodies, all of it was intoxicating, pushing her deeper into a realm of pleasure and abandon. She could feel Ethan watching, his presence a constant reminder of the choices she was making. But rather than feeling constrained by his gaze, she felt empowered by it. His approval fueled her, making her bolder with each passing moment. She wanted to show him just how far she was willing to go, just how much she was capable of embracing this wild new side of herself. "Dance for us," one of them urged again, and without a second thought, Madison moved to the center of the room once more, letting the music wash over her as she swayed her hips. The rhythm pulsated through her, and she let herself get lost in the movement, her body responding instinctively to the beat. As she danced, she noticed the way their eyes followed her every move, filled with awe and desire. It was an exhilarating feeling, and she fed off their energy, allowing herself to be swept away by the rhythm of the night. The dance became more than just a performance. It was an expression of her newfound freedom, a celebration of everything she had discovered about herself in just a few short hours. "Take it all off," one of the men called out, and with a rush of adrenaline, Madison complied. The thrill of the moment fueled her as she peeled away the remaining barriers, leaving her completely exposed and unguarded. The cheers that erupted from the men made her heart race even faster, and she felt a flush of heat creep up her cheeks. In that moment, she realized that she was no longer just participating in a game. She was fully embracing the experience, allowing herself to be vulnerable, to be seen in ways she had never allowed before. The exhilaration of being the object of their desire ignited something within her, something primal and powerful. As the night continued, the boundaries between them began to fade, and Madison felt herself becoming one with the energy in the room. She was no longer just Madison. She was a goddess of the night, a woman who had discovered her power and was ready to wield it. With the music pulsing around her, Madison felt a sense of liberation like never before. The men circled her, their eyes filled with admiration and lust, as they encouraged her every move. She twirled and swayed, letting the rhythm guide her body, embracing the intoxicating energy that enveloped her. But it wasn't just about the dance. It was about the connection she felt with Ethan's friends, the way they watched her. Their expressions a mix of desire and excitement. The thrill of their attention ignited something deep within her, a spark that urged her to push the boundaries even further. One of the men stepped forward, a playful grin on his face. "Why don't we see how well you can dance on your knees?" he suggested, his tone light, but his gaze heavy with intent. Madison felt a rush of adrenaline at the challenge, and without hesitation, she sank down to her knees, ready to embrace whatever came next. As she danced there, the world around her blurred, the sounds of laughter and encouragement blending into a euphoric melody. She was lost in the moment, completely consumed by the sensations that flooded her body. The way they looked at her, the way they cheered her on. It was intoxicating, and she felt invincible. "Now let's take turns," another man proposed, and Madison looked up, catching Ethan's eye. His gaze was steady, filled with pride and approval, and it fueled her desire to please, to show them all just how far she was willing to go. The men began to take their turns, guiding her movements, encouraging her to explore this new side of herself. Each one took a moment to appreciate her, their hands exploring her body, their voices coaxing her deeper into the experience. With every touch, she felt herself unraveling, surrendering to the thrill of the night. Madison's heart raced as she found herself at the center of their attention, their laughter echoing in her ears as they took turns teasing her, pushing her limits, encouraging her to embrace every moment. And with each passing moment, she felt herself letting go, shedding her inhibitions like the clothes that had fallen away earlier. It was liberating, intoxicating, and a little terrifying. But as the night continued, Madison realized that she had crossed a threshold, and there was no going back. She was fully immersed in this wild new world, and she wanted to embrace every exhilarating second of it. "Let's make this even more interesting," one of the men said, his voice low and enticing. "How about we blindfold her?" The suggestions sent a thrill of excitement through the room, and Madison felt her breath hitch. Being blindfolded would heighten her senses, leaving her vulnerable and exposed in a way she had never experienced. Ethan nodded, his expression darkening with approval as the blindfold was placed over her eyes. The world around her shifted, the sounds growing sharper, more defined. She could hear the rustle of clothing, the quiet whispers of anticipation, and it sent a shiver down her spine. She was no longer just Madison. She was an open canvas, ready for them to paint their desires upon. "Now, let's see how well you can dance without knowing what's coming next," one of the men teased, and Madison felt a rush of excitement course through her. The uncertainty only added to the thrill, and as she began to move again, she let her body guide her, surrendering to the rhythm of the night. With the blindfold on, she felt even more aware of the world around her. Every touch, every whisper sent her senses into overdrive. She could feel the heat of their bodies close to hers, the way their eyes roamed over her, and it made her heart race with exhilaration. It was a dance of desire, a game of trust, and she was ready to play. As she moved, the men began to tease her, their voices swirling around her, encouraging her, challenging her to give in to the sensations. "Can you feel how much we want you?" one of them asked, his breath warm against her ear. Madison shivered, feeling the heat of desire building within her, pushing her deeper into the moment. In that darkened room, with the world outside fading away, Madison found herself lost in a whirlwind of sensations. She was free, liberated from the constraints of her former self, ready to embrace whatever came next. The night had transformed her, and she was eager to discover just how far she could go. As Madison swayed to the rhythm of the music, the blindfold enveloping her senses heightened every sensation. Each touch felt electric, each whisper sending shivers down her spine. She could no longer see the faces of the men surrounding her, but she could feel their presence, their energy radiating like heat waves in the dimly lit room. The thrill of the unknown spurred her on, and she lost herself in the dance, her body moving with an urgency and abandon she had never known. She could hear their murmurs of encouragement, the way their laughter echoed, and it drove her to push further, to explore the depths of her newfound freedom. "Let's take turns again," one of the men suggested, and she felt a rush of excitement at the thought. The idea of being at their mercy, completely vulnerable and exposed, sent a thrill through her. They guided her, their hands gentle yet firm, coaxing her deeper into the experience. Madison felt a hand on her waist, pulling her close as another man leaned in, his breath warm against her ear. "You're doing amazing," he whispered, and the compliment made her heart race. Encouraged by their admiration, she let go even more, surrendering to the moment, letting herself be swept away by the current of desire that flowed through the room. With each new touch, she felt the barriers she had built around herself begin to crumble. The blindfold had removed her ability to see, but in many ways it opened her up to new possibilities, new sensations. She was no longer confined by her expectations or her fears. Instead, she was free to explore this wild, intoxicating world that had unfolded around her. One of the men stepped closer, his hands guiding her movements as they danced together, their bodies moving in sync. "Let's have some fun," he said, and she could hear the playful challenge in his voice. The thrill of uncertainty sparked her curiosity, igniting a fire within her. Suddenly the music shifted, becoming more intense, a pulsing beat that matched the quickening rhythm of her heart. "Can you keep up?" another voice teased, and with a newfound determination, Madison dove into the challenge, her body moving with a fluidity that surprised even her. She felt powerful, alive, and in control in a way she had never felt before. As the dance progressed, the men began to take their turns again, each one guiding her through a whirlwind of sensations. Their hands roamed over her skin, exploring every curve and contour, and Madison surrendered completely, allowing herself to be vulnerable and exposed. She felt like a canvas, ready for them to paint their desires upon her. With each new interaction, her confidence grew, and the thrill of their attention sent her further into a state of bliss. She had transformed from the woman who had walked into the party into someone bold and daring, ready to embrace whatever came next. The excitement of the unknown only fueled her desire, urging her to push her boundaries even further. As he guided her through another round of tantalizing movements, Madison surrendered to the sensations, allowing herself to be fully present in the moment. She felt liberated, empowered by the thrill of being desired by these men, of being at the center of their attention. The music enveloped her, and she danced with abandon, every move a celebration of her newfound freedom. The men continued to take turns, each interaction igniting a new wave of desire within her. They coaxed her to explore her body in ways she had never imagined, and with each touch, each whisper, she felt herself unraveling, surrendering to the intensity of the experience. "Let's see how well you can handle this," one of them teased, and Madison felt a rush of exhilaration as he pushed her further into the depths of her desires. She was no longer just a woman defined by her past. She was becoming something new, something powerful, ready to embrace everything the night had to offer. The room pulsed with energy, the laughter and cheers blending into a harmonious chorus of desire. Madison felt alive, fully immersed in the experience, and she reveled in the feeling of liberation that coursed through her. She was ready to push her boundaries, to explore every inch of her desires, and to embrace the wild adventure that lay ahead. As the night wore on, Madison realized she had transformed into someone unrecognizable, someone who was bold, daring, and ready to seize every moment. The thrill of being desired, of being the object of their attention, filled her with an intoxicating rush, and she was ready to surrender to the experience fully. The music swelled around her, the energy in the room becoming almost palpable, and Madison felt herself becoming one with the rhythm, ready to explore the depths of her own pleasure as the night continued to unfold. Madison continued to dance, her movements flowing freely, a captivating display of confidence and allure that left the men spellbound. With each passing moment, she could feel the heat of their gazes upon her, their desire palpable, fueling her excitement and pushing her deeper into the realm of pleasure. "Now, let's make this even more thrilling," one of the men suggested, stepping closer with an impish grin. "How about we blindfold her again?" The thrill of the proposal sent a rush of adrenaline through her. The idea of surrendering her sight once more only heightened her senses, and she eagerly nodded, ready for whatever lay ahead. The blindfold was secured over her eyes, plunging her into darkness once more. As her surroundings faded away, Madison felt a rush of exhilaration, her other senses sharpening. She could hear the soft rustle of clothing, the low murmur of laughter, and the unmistakable pulse of the music that enveloped her like a warm embrace. "Now, let's see how well you can handle being teased," one of the men said, his voice dripping with anticipation. Madison felt a thrill race through her as the anticipation of what was to come sent shivers down her spine. Trusting them would mean letting go completely, allowing herself to be led deeper into this wild experience. "Follow our lead," another voice instructed, and Madison concentrated on the sounds around her, ready to surrender to the sensations that awaited her. She felt a hand on her waist guiding her movements, and she responded instinctively, allowing her body to flow with the rhythm of the music. "Now, feel for the hands that reach out to you," one of the men encouraged. Madison focused her energy, extending her senses, and she felt the warmth of hands on her skin, their touch igniting a fire within her. The thrill of being at their mercy, completely vulnerable yet so powerfully desired, sent her heart racing. "Let's take turns again," one of them suggested, his voice filled with excitement. Madison felt a rush of anticipation at the prospect of being guided through this next phase of the experience. She was eager to explore, to discover the depths of her own desires and to push the boundaries further than she had ever thought possible. As the first man stepped forward, his hands gliding over her body, Madison felt a rush of pleasure course through her. His touch was gentle yet firm, coaxing her to surrender fully to the moment. She revelled in the sensations, feeling the heat radiate from him, igniting every nerve ending in her body. "Now, let's see how well you can dance while we take our turns," he instructed, and Madison nodded, ready to embrace the challenge. She let the music guide her movements, swaying her hips as the men took turns exploring her, each new touch igniting a fresh wave of desire. With every caress, she felt herself becoming more and more lost in the experience. The boundaries between her and the men began to blur, and she surrendered completely, allowing herself to be swept away by the current of passion that enveloped her. The thrill of being desired, of being wanted by them, sent waves of pleasure crashing over her, and she revelled in the intensity of it all. As the men took their turns, Madison found herself caught in a whirlwind of sensations. The warmth of their hands, the excitement in their voices, and the intoxicating atmosphere made her feel alive in ways she had never imagined. She was no longer just a participant, she was the heartbeat of the room, the embodiment of desire and passion. "Now let's push the boundaries even further," one of the men said, stepping closer. "I want you to give us your best performance." The challenge sent a thrill of excitement coursing through her. She was ready to show them everything she was capable of, to embrace the wildness of the night. As she moved, the energy in the room surged, and Madison felt a rush of empowerment wash over her. She was free, liberated from the constraints of her past, ready to dive headfirst into the adventure that lay ahead. The laughter, the music, the desire, everything blended into a symphony of sensations, and Madison surrendered to it completely. In that dimly lit room, surrounded by eager admirers and filled with the intoxicating energy of the night, she knew she was becoming someone entirely new. This was her reality now, a reality where pleasure knew no bounds, where she could explore the depths of her desires without fear. And as the night continued to unfold, Madison embraced every moment, ready to seize the wild adventure that awaited her. Thanks for watching. The next story is ready and just as thrilling. Subscribe to catch new stories every day.